Ozzie, it's been a year since we did the last one, and I feel like it's probably a good idea to try to make this a more recurring thing. But to everybody watching, thank you for joining us to see kind of some updates and things that's going on. We're trying to do a fireside chat type thing to help make it lighthearted, but give people some information about what's going on with IntelliGRC and just kind of the industries that we care a lot about. So I'm Steven Molter. I do some of the content creation here. I also do our GRC consulting and support the DIB heavily, but also we try to support other industries as well with their GRC needs. So that's me. Really quickly, just to kind of touch on the agenda for the fireside chat here today. We're going to go over mainly three segments. We want to talk about what's been happening with IntelliGRC as a company. Ozzie will touch on most of that, and then I'll probably relatively briefly touch on some of the regulatory landscape, some of the things that have been happening over the last few months and maybe year, but try to keep it high level, keep it focused on what matters most. And then we'll wrap up with some feature related updates with IntelliGRC so that, in the context of, what's going on with the company and in the context of what's going on in the industry, what are some of the solutions that we're trying to, put out there to help people make their lives easier and get GRC done. So that's kind of the general summary of where we're trying to go on today. So just a couple links and notes. I'll be mentioning some a blog here and there that we have put out to help kind of go more in depth. So like I said earlier, I'm going to be touching high level on some of these regulatory updates, but just know that we do have some other resources that we want you guys to take advantage of and check out. So please look at that. So Ozzie, really quick, would you go ahead and introduce yourself for anybody maybe who's watching that doesn't know you very well, and also kind of give people a high level of what IntelliGRC is?
Yeah, sure. My name's Ozzie Saeed, founder and CEO of IntelliGRC. My background mostly has been in the federal government space. Started my career in the technical IT engineering, systems engineering, and then kind of went through that phase of virtualization technology, and then slowly, surely pivoted towards information assurance. So, come from mostly the DoD space as a defense contractor, and have been in that space for most of my career. And at some point in time, we got involved with some grant funding work where we helped some small businesses in the state of Virginia through the NIST MEP program to navigate the DFARS 7012 requirements. This was 2016 to like 2017 timeframe. And around that, that's when I kind of started noticing the potential need there for small businesses and the fact that the best way for us to help these small businesses survive the defense industrial base regulatory requirements coming down the pipe is through these managed service providers. And so that's when we said, hey, let's try to build a solution, IntelliGRC, which is a B2B SaaS governance, risk, and compliance tool that we're trying to make it heavily focused on MSPs and how they could scale their services operations so that we can essentially satisfy our grassroots mission of making cyber compliance accessible to small companies.
So with the backdrop of Intelli kind of coming out of your needs and desires to help with the DIB and whatnot, what are some of the more specific areas and problems that IntelliGRC kind of on the ground level, on the day-to-day level, is kind of designed to support and implement and help with?
Yeah, sure. Like when we started developing IntelliGRC, the first thing we were adamant about is feeling the pain firsthand that a customer would go through. So literally working with companies directly to go from zero to certified for things like CMMC, ISO 27001, SOC 2, et cetera, et cetera. That enabled us to actually understand the pain firsthand and say, okay, how can we make this more tolerable, right? How can we make this scale better? And then that's when we started to continue to develop the platform around those things in terms of like, what's it going to take to prep a company to go through a third-party audit or assessment and pass with confidence. And then that naturally evolved into more of the continuous monitoring concepts. But that's, again, where we think the MSPs out there have the need is for them to be able to do this stuff at a high caliber level that otherwise is very expensive to hire that skill set. And so that's the mission we're on. And so hopefully that kind of explains it.
Yeah, they got to be able to scale. The MSP's got to be able to scale, and they got to take care of these people. And yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So do we want to dive into some of the company updates, I guess, here with it kind of getting into the first segment, and some of the things that you can touch on related to seed funding and all the things that have been excitingly happening around these parts?
Yeah, absolutely. So last year I started raising around quarter 3 a seed round. Historically, we were mostly bootstrapped, where we were doing tech-enabled services to fund the development of our product. Um, and then I started pitching for a seed round, and I ended up through the MSP ecosystem getting connected to uh, Jennifer Vanderweer. She actually used to be a customer of ours as well. She had just sold her MSP to a PE firm, and so she was heavily involved in the MSP ecosystem, things like the ConnectWise Evolve communities and stuff like that. So she immediately started plugging us into these other uh, MSP organizations. And naturally, that's when I was able, through Jennifer, to meet Kyle Hanslovin. Kyle is the founder and CEO of Huntress. And so I was able to meet him and tell him about our story. There was a lot of similarities. In fact, he was like, "Your story's just like ours." But it was a blessing because Kyle helped us navigate a lot of the challenges around raising funds. We thought we knew a little bit about it, but we knew nothing, right? And so it's really helpful
Right.
to have a mentor like that, involved, who's been there, has done that, and is guiding you towards that process. But yeah, so we raised 3.5 million. Most of the funds actually came from customers of ours, existing customers of ours. Um, and yeah, so we raised it. The idea was that we're going to leverage this money to continue our growth. Um, we doubled our revenue in the last 6 months, and we're continuing to double down on that. But the idea is that how do we continue to expand on some of these automation functionalities around AI, right? Integrations, the things that I'm noticing as delta or gaps in the MSP ecosystem, right? Which is
Yeah.
arming them with the wisdom, right? Because wisdom is very hard to scale, right? So that's kind of the journey we're on right now, but everything's going well so far.
Yeah, knowledge-based experience. Yeah, you gotta get it from somewhere. It's got to come from somewhere. So yeah, I guess one of the questions that I wanted to maybe ask and see if it would be helpful for people who are trying to keep track of us and keep up the tabs on with what we're doing is what has ended up being we said AI integrations, feature sets, things like that is kind of the goal for this funding. Um, has that ended up being what it was allocated to? Are there surprising expenses and growth projections and things like that that came up that surprised you or surprised our team?
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, the main intention was a combination of spending the funds on go to market, so sales and marketing naturally, expanding on the product side in terms of like how do we make the product scale better. Like, for example, we use a control library called ICL, or the Intelligent Control Library, and we're able to publish new frameworks because of the way we've kind of implemented that without needing developers, right? And so we've kind of doubled down on some of those things where, in order for us to scale more efficiently, we're enabling like a SME, a subject matter expert, to come in and build things in the tool. And so that's kind of been the approach. The surprise that ended up happening is the operations expenses, right? Us
Yes.
folks that have a background in engineering and then going into compliance, like we always tend to forget that, hey, there's a lot of operational overhead in running running a company, right? So it's like some of the expenses that we didn't anticipate, right, around like HR and things like that. And we're like, oh, okay. But definitely still a consistent learning journey, and everything's going great so far.
What are some of the future plans or goals related to funding, related to, what anything that you're willing to share about upcoming future plans and vision for like at the company level?
Yeah, sure. So right now we're just continuing to continue the go to market motions that we have right now, right? And continue expanding on that. Um, our goal was always to triple the revenue this year. And as I mentioned, the last 6 months we doubled it. So I'm pretty sure, pretty confident that we'll hit those numbers. I do see next year, sometime in quarter 2, likely that we're going to have to go for what's called a Series A round, and that is a higher investment amount to continue funding the growth, right? Um, and so what we're trying to do is essentially continue the growth path, but I think the journey that we're on is a combination of getting people to recognize who we are, our brand recognition, Historically, it's always been word of mouth. Like 80% of our revenue is all through word of mouth, right? It's a customer telling another customer and saying, hey, these guys are good guys, right? And so that's worked out well for us, but it's not going to work out well in the future when we want to go after larger numbers, right? So we now are getting more strategic about how do we get brand awareness to be a thing, right? Make it better for the company. But also more importantly, how do we start listening to our MSP partners and getting in tune with them, right? Tightening up that relationship to ensure that the roadmap and what it is we bring to the table is truly valuable in the partnership we have with these service providers.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And, development is going to be a big piece of this. And we're going to talk towards the end of the fireside chat here about some of the development milestones that we've reached and upcoming goals and things like that. But, also on the hiring side, we've expanded greatly. Do you want to touch on, headcount and things like that and future plans for hiring and stuff like that? Maybe people be aware of and keep an eye out on?
Yeah. So earlier in the year, we sat at about roughly 20 full-time equivalents. We're pretty much at this point around 32. Um, and so I do see that over the next year, towards the end of 27, we'll probably more than double that potentially. Like, so it's pretty fast pace right now. But
Wow.
the market's asking for it, right? The customers need
Yeah.
help. And I'm trying to ensure that we do it at the same caliber as if we were still a 5 or 10 man team, right? And that's the challenge that we're working on right now, right? Is making sure we keep that momentum, but also the high quality outcomes.
Yeah, I guess, maybe to wrap up some of the company updates, and kind of move and transition into maybe some of the regulatory stuff. I do want to ask you one more question about the company though, is a lot of the projections and a lot of the, growth, milestones and things like that, has that been impacted or maybe, has there been any concerns or maybe even, boosts to those efforts because in light of some of the recent regulatory changes like the July 13th suspension of CMMC Phase 2 implementation and things like that?
Yeah. So what's interesting is that we assumed there would be a hit. We haven't seen it yet.
Yeah.
Uh, and I say that because the requirement hasn't changed, right? Only thing that's changed is a pause on something new that hasn't happened yet.
Mm.
So we're still riding the wave of what's been happening, right? That wave is still going, right? Which is the fact that you still have to be compliant today with CMMC level 1 or level 2, and you need to have a self attestation score. And I think most folks in the industry, like you've probably heard, is that you, it's probably riskier right now more than anything because
100%.
the eyes are on the people that are putting in the self-assessment score saying, are you sure about that? Right. It's kind of like that meme where the guy's like, are you sure about that? Right.
You sure
Otherwise you
about
exactly, you can
that?
get the
Right.
false,
Yeah. Yeah.
right. So nothing's changed for us, right? Even the industry, nothing's changed. It's just a pause on something new that hasn't occurred yet.
Yeah. And that's a really good point because we're not talking about something that, people were already fundamentally obligated to do uniquely from what had been in some senses required. There were a couple situations, right, where like the C3PO certification assessment requirements had been included in contracts posterior to that November 10th, kickoff of Phase 2, where we would start seeing them kind of be as the norm and introduced. And so we did see a little bit of, contracting officers being told that they have to clean that up, to strip away those certification assessment requirements out of the contract and either revert back to, self-assessments or whatever the case may be. But you're right. Like DFARS 7012 is still here, guys. It's nothing fundamental has changed. And just the implementation of those requirements onto contracts as the validation method of you implementing the requirements you had to been required, you were required already to implement. That's what's been suspended. So that's kind of leads me into, just giving that update, if you've been living under a rock, which you probably haven't. So to most listeners, this is probably not new information, but as of the time of recording this fireside chat here in the year of our Lord, July 2028 of 2026, we're standing in a little bit of a limbo, right? Where the DoD CIO, Kristen Davies, has formally suspended the implementation of phase 2, like we just said. And with that memo, with that declaration of suspension, we're dealing with them, like I said, stripping out contractual requirements that included the November 10th norm ahead of time, which would have been those certification assessment requirements for level 2 and also level 3, by the way, and putting that on hold, and thereby also suspending the subsequent phases, right? You can't move on to phase 3 and phase 4 because the language of phase 3 is it starts a year after phase 2, right? So it's an obvious subsequent, predication too. So all that to say, Ozzie's exactly right. We're not dealing with implementation changes, right? Because we still have CMMC level 1 and we still have CMMC level 2 self-assessments, which have the exact same requirements. The only difference is fundamentally the fact that a third-party assessment organization, a C3PAO, is not coming in at this moment to do the certification as part of the conditions of award of the contract or extensions or task orders or other contractual vehicles, right? We're not talking about anything new in regards to the technical requirements. Your external service providers. This is one that I don't think we're talking about enough. Is people hear phase 2 is suspended, but it's like, well, yes, but CMMC level 2 is not suspended. That's not the same thing. And therefore, people who have CMMC level 2 requirements under the 32 CFR Part 170.19, for example, where they're talking about scoping, they're talking about how you have to interact with external service providers. Those are all still there for those level 2 self-assessment companies. So are you still grabbing your CRM from those external service providers? Are you still, making sure that they're involved in being ready to be validated, or DIBCAC to need to come in and do an audit, right? Like, is everything that would pose the most significant risks to you from an implementation perspective still in place? Because none of that has changed. It's just the fact that you don't need to get a certification from this third-party assessment organization to be considered for award of the contract. That's the only thing that's changed at this moment. And when we say change, we're just saying suspend. It could come back in full swing. We don't know. We're in a 60-day review period right now. So I know I'm rambling, but that's kind of the clarity that I need. And I don't know, Ozzie, if you want to add anything to just encourage our users not to be disheartened and also think that their efforts have been a waste, because they fundamentally have not been.
Yeah, no, I'd say so although the terminology suspension is being used, it's more of a pause in the way that it's behaving, right? You've got the 60-day task force that the DoD CIO put together to do a program review. I think it's also important for us to state that this is not new. When we heard this, when it happened on the 13th, we were like, oh, not again, right? This is the third time this has happened again. And it's naturally anticipated even when a CIO comes into office. First thing you do is review the efficiencies or the operational success of their programs, right? And so they're like, we want to pause, we want to figure this out. And so I think the only thing that if I were to take a guess at what's going to happen here, I think what's going to happen is that we're going to see this pause result in more information gathering from the industry. Hopefully then that gets used for more informed decision making. I believe the program will resume with some future stated enhancements, right? Where they're going to say something about how we increase operational efficiency. How do we make this program scale better, right? So there's going to be some new stuff probably added, naturally so. But yeah, I also wanted to mention real quick is I got into some industry conversations with folks in the ecosystem, the CMMC ecosystem, who were able to go have a meeting with Kirsten Davies last week. And I heard some good news, right? It actually was very encouraging news in that Kirsten Davies was learning a lot of information that she was not aware of, right? One of the things that was brought to her attention, and it's kind of obvious who the naysayers are, was that, hey, there's not enough C3PAOs, right, to scale. And the data actually proves otherwise, right? And so they now that she's hearing this from the people in the trenches, right, she's saying, I had no idea. Like, this is news to me. And that's promising because she says herself she's learning, right? And that she sees positive outcomes, right? And she sees the benefits to the program overall, which is intellectual property protections for the nation, right? Naturally show. And the other thing that I got wind of is that this whole thing came about not because there was a ton of noise about this being problematic. It actually, from my understanding, came about because of the current situation in the political climate in which, we've got the war in Ukraine, we've got the war in Iran, and you're getting the president and leadership going to the Secretary of War, Hegseth, and saying, we need more stuff fast.
Yeah.
Well, I need you to remove the bottlenecks or remove the red tape that's getting in the way of speed to production, right? Speed things to market, speed things so that they can continue what they're already in the midst of. And I think CMMC just ended up getting right into the target, right? On accident, right? Where it's like, maybe this is something that slows down procurement. But then they found out that's actually not the case. That has not been the case because even
Yeah.
if there was a contract today that said you need it, it gave you grace period, it gave you time and said, you don't have to be certified today, but at least have a score, right? A self-assessment score and work towards it, right? So I think there was an overreaction to that demand, right? That's all it simply was, is a lot of miscommunication and an overreaction to the urgency and the demand coming from the Department of War. If that makes
Yeah.
sense.
All the fundamental concerns that they had for CMMC was really just misguided frustration with DFARS 7012 in reality.
100%.
Yeah, it was just
100%.
misguided. If they really wanted, which they were saying from that get go of this, nothing in DFARS 7012 is changing. But it's like, guys, that's the thing
That's
that
the
people
problem.
are worried about. Now, I've been I had a great conversation with Matt Travis the other day on the podcast, and and I made this point to him that it's we need to give a little grace to not the naysayers that are spreading this information. I mean, they need grace too, but we're not giving credibility to what they're saying. But does need that credibility and grace and understanding, empathy, is people who are experiencing some of the newer nuances that the CMMC program provided to DFAR 7012. So things like scoping expectations that were not relevant under DFAR 7012 back in 2016, 2017, essentially up until we had, the scoping guides that ended up getting enshrined into 32 CFR, right? We didn't have that context. We only had the CUI asset and maybe security protection asset concept, and that was it, right? So that we have, we have the concepts around external service providers and how you handle them and how you deal. I mean, under the proposed rule just a couple of years ago, everybody thought that their MSPs were going to have to be fully certified to the same level as their, as their customer. We don't
that
have
misinformation still exists, right?
Yeah, exactly. Which, just to clarify, MSPs, even if they still process and transmit CUI on behalf of their customers, are not technically required to have a level 2 certification. They just are part of the scope of the OSC to get certified or assessed if they're a level 2 assessment. Point being is we need to give grace to people who did see some of these nuances come out, especially with the rigmarole of the proposed rule and the FedRAMP requirements for security protection and all that stuff. We need to give some grace there. But at the same time, if the DoD is really concerned about things that are impeding efficiency, they need to look at they need to look at the root cause, and that is how DFAR 7012 currently is instantiated and through the CMMC program validated. And if I had if I was to have to bet one way or another on what I think is going to happen, I would say that we will see modernization efforts through this too. Very similar to how the FedRAMP, CR26, which we'll get to, had some similar modernization, validation, continuous monitoring related, maybe enhancements, like to use the word you use, enhancements to the program. But I think, the DoD is going to come to very similar conclusions to previous CIOs. And I'm hopeful. Yeah, I'm definitely hopeful for the future. What do you think about that, Ozzie?
I agree. Completely agree. I think, like you said, the root causes, I think, are constantly overlooked. Like in some of the conversations I'm hearing in the industry is like, if you really wanted to cut costs, look at the requirements that drive the majority of it, FedRAMP and FIPS, right? If you really want to make it so that the CMMC program is more efficient and scalable, then clarity is the biggest pain point I'm seeing so far, right?
100%.
And throughout history. Every time you
Consistency
try
and
to get
clarity.
every time you get any kind of guidance from the government, it's like clear as mud, right? And it just ends up mudding that water. So I think
Yeah.
we need that consistent clarity. If you really want to solve these issues, we need this task force or even future task force to focus on the trench level experiences and
Yeah.
listen to the people. Because we, on the side of the implementers who have done it, have gone through it, know where the problems lie. Rely on that.
Yeah. 100%. So another, I guess coming out of that, definitely relevant. And I think is actually, I will say just my 2 cents, I think is one of the considerations that led to the suspension. If I go with my gut, if I think the FAR CUI rule and the progress that was being made there, the recent update to the proposed rule, the fact that they're quoting the DoD's ODPs as the ODPs for consistency that they're going to be using, I have a feeling that this was definitely timely and is not just sheer coincidence. Same thing goes with like I said earlier, the FedRAMP, CR26 stuff. I think a lot of this is where the government is realizing that the red tape of the RMF mindset is very good for security, but it's very bad for efficiency and always has been. And again, what's the goal of security? Well, or what's the trade-off, I guess, with security? It's always, hardcore has always been the mantra being that security has been in opposition to efficiency and flexibility and pragmatism and things like that. And I think the government's realizing that doesn't have to be the case, right? You can have solid security even in industry and at least still help people do their jobs efficiently. And so, but that takes time to work out and figure out and, apply. And I think we're seeing that with the FedRAMP changes with the 20X program and the CR26. So I think for the FAR CUI rule, I mean, we're talking about this really big deal because we're not at this point, we're talking at the FAR CUI council level. We're talking about that at the FAR council level. We're not talking about just the Department of Defense anymore. And so, one of the recent features, which we'll get to, that we added to IntelliGRC is we added NIST 871 Rev 3, and we added before that this ODP, organization defined parameters and organization defined variables, because that's where the industry is going. And it's not just the DoD defense industrial base industry anymore. It's we're on a trajectory for the entirety of the federal acquisitions to at least have some where controlling classified information is involved. We're on a trajectory to be living in NIST 871 Rev 3 world and not Rev 2 with its faults and foibles, but that we know and love as people in the dip. We're on a trajectory of a big update. So that's kind of the idea. So we're talking about a proposed rule, an update that got posted back in June. There's, I don't want to spend too much time on it, to be honest, because I haven't spent a lot of time on it myself. But, just to keep people aware, this was a major change. We're still talking about the new special form that's going to come with it that will require the agencies through their contracting officials to make sure that any CUI that's going to be part of the contract is specified in this new special form, which is a huge blessing to contractors. I would just say that's been, and Ozzie can attest to this too, that this is probably one of the most common gripes that we get and complaints that we get from contractors is they have no clue what the heck CUI, what CUI they're dealing with. And it's because either the government doesn't market, right? They don't market properly, or the primes don't market properly, or they just get too much flown down to them, and it has nothing to do with what they exist for in that supply chain. It's just a mess of flow down, or a lack thereof of clear flow down, or clarity in flow down, I should. So that this FAR CUI rule is meant to make make consistent the things that have thus far been inconsistent, and to provide a clear framework, which is 800.171 Rev 3, and they specify what those ODP values are going to end up being. They did adjust the reporting requirements. I think it had previously been 8 hours, within 8 hours of just, and they updated it back to be consistent with what the FAR 7012 had originally said of 72 hours for that definition of rapid reporting for incidents, which is huge, right? Like, obviously we want incidents to be reported, and that's a fundamental part of incident response is speed, but speed with informed, it's informed speed. There's a proverb that says, it's zeal without knowledge. You're doing things, but you don't know what the heck is going on. So you're making steps and you're taking actions and you're moving forward, but you're not doing it in an informed way, and that's detrimental. So this makes sense. So make it consistent. And then it also talks about 800.171, 172 for some more critical programs. Because remember, the DoD, we're also talking about critical infrastructure, the Department of Energy. We're talking about Department of Transportation with, planes, trains, and automobiles. I mean, we're talking about all sorts of fundamental things that, like, you think of terrorism, you think of, the same concerns that Ozzie and I have and the rest of the div has for, defense related CUI. We got big risks over here too in the rest of the federal acquisition space. So just keep in mind the FAR CUI rule. It's on its way. We don't have obviously a specific date. Normally, when we're talking about, rulemaking, this is already kind of varied off course, because normally there's a proposed rule then a final rule, but they released a separate proposed rule for information, or for the industry to provide information for again. So there's no way to really know exactly when this is going to be finalized. If I had to put money on it, and Ozzie, I'm curious to hear your thoughts, but if I had to put money on it, I think we would see probably a final rule by the end of the year, but that's just my gut reaction. Thoughts?
Yeah, I would agree. No, I would agree. I see something around the end of the year, early next year as well. I mean, I think what's important here is look at the signal of the market, right? Before, when you look at regulatory trends, most people would look to Europe and say, okay, Europe is a little more advanced in terms of regulatory information security trends, right?
Yeah.
Things like privacy, and then it evolves into state level privacy laws in the United States. I think the signal's clear, though. The clear signal here is there is a need for intellectual property protections, as well as some level of common hygiene on the cyber side, to say that we are doing the best we can, right? No one's saying this stuff is going to prevent things. That's not possible. You cannot prevent any malicious things from happening or any negative outcomes of a cyber attack, whatever it may be. But you can thwart them, and you can demonstrate that due care, due diligence, which is I tried to do the best I can. Now, if every person or every organization out there's explanation of the best they can is different, that's where then we run into these issues, like whose philosophy of secure is better than the others, right? This stuff is already happening, right? We're already hearing things about threats of blackouts in energy companies across the country. In fact, think about it. We're at war right now with Iran, who is listed as one of the top 10 red team hacking organizations out there, nation state hacking organizations within the top 10. And so it's like, now's the time to start making this stuff more formalized across all sectors, right? And I don't mean that just because it's like, hey, everybody should just do better security. No, this is actually our livelihoods, right? You want clean water, you want consistent energy, you want consistent gas, you want to have a standards of living. Well, guess what? There's some tax you got to pay for that, right? That standards of living is being threatened day by day. And the tax is this, right? And again, we're not saying that it has to be that complicated. I think, in my opinion, what 171 did a great job at is establishing some really good baseline of what is good, right? I still see it as a baseline. So, anywho, excited about it. And I think, again, you see Canada doing the same thing, but this is just more and more of it's coming.
Yeah. I don't think we can just get away from it. I don't think we can get away from it, and I certainly don't think that it would be wise to see what happens, right? Like take the the that's the common mantra within the div is, we've been holding off and waiting to see what happens. And it's like, guys, they're always going to have hiccups. They're always going to have regulatory red tape. But at the end of the day, does 800.171 really help your organization get more secure and protect your own data if you're using the same controls to protect it? Of course it does. Of course it does. So yeah. So really quickly to touch on some of the other things going on. Here's a little bit of a timeline for some of the recent things that have happened and things that are coming up with, especially for FedRAMP. We've got, as many of you know, they finalized the CR26 back in June, and they've opened it up for early adoption. So if it can formally be utilized now at this month in July, that occurred. We're also talking about a Rev 5, pipeline. There's still some questions to be asked when we're talking about things like FedRAMP moderate equivalency. This is one of the blogs that I was mentioning in the intro, is that I did put out a blog kind of really doing a deep dive on the CR26, at least the things that are relevant to us in the DIB. And one of the things that I realized is we still have so many questions, but not GSA questions per se. They're DoD questions in light of what GSA has done here with the consolidated rules. So for sake of time, I'm not going to dive into that, but go ahead and check out that blog. And also, if anybody has heard any information or has answers to these questions that are well sourced, I'd love to hear them. So please, hit us up and reach out to us. We'd love to keep things updated and update the industry. And we haven't seen a lot of movement on things related to things like FedRAMP moderate equivalency and stuff like that, which we really need answers to. Because that's enshrined in DFARS. It has nothing to do with CMMC, phase 2 or the suspension there. This is a DFARS 7012 thing that we really need to make sure we have good answers for. So just a thought there. All right, so Ozzie, I would like to jump into some of the major features that have come out over the last year. We mentioned some of these last year, but they've come a long way this year as well. Improvements and things like that. So just diving in for sake of time, we want to talk about Evan and Alfie. We mentioned Evan and Alfie last year, introduced what they are, what they do, but just to review, Evan is one of the 3, I would say, AI capabilities within IntelliGRC right now. We're trying to expand that and grow that and make that just fundamental standard, but it takes time, it takes effort, and we're trying to make it make sense. And we're not trying to just implement AI capabilities so that we could slap a label on and say that we are AI powered, but we want to actually do it smartly, wisely, and actually that's in a way that's useful and not just a chat bot that interacts with data. Though we want to do that too. That's on the roadmap too. So the first one, Evan, just to remind everybody, or maybe if you've never heard of us or heard of what we do, Evan is a capability within the IntelliGRC platform that will allow you to when you upload your evidence to say, screenshot or something that you think supports a particular set of requirements or requirement singular. Evan exists to help you with the legwork of mapping those artifacts, documents, etc., that you upload as evidence to their proper home in the requirements that they belong to, that you want them to be represented as evidence for. That's what Evan exists for. And Evan's gone through, a lot of improvements. He's awesome. We love him. We can't imagine life without him. We're really making these guys human. No, but and then Alfie is Evan's best friend. He does the back end usefulness of it. So he takes the mapped evidence and he applies it to real world analysis scenarios. So for example, his main functionality is when you're in the gap analysis of IntelliGRC, you've mapped evidence, maybe supported with Evan, to a particular set of requirements. Alfie takes that evidence that he's been given and uses his context, context like what assets have been mapped to the boundary and things like that, and makes a decision based on what he sees and suggests a decision as to whether or not he believes that the requirement has been met sufficiently or not based on what he sees. And he will help you write your implementation statements if it is implemented properly. And if it's not, he will provide the rationale and even provide recommendations and specificity in his findings. And then he will, and he provides the language for like a properly formatted, statement for those things. So it's meant to assist the assessor, whether it's an internal assessor or it's like an MSP, MSPs out there that are trying to do gap analysis as part of like a GRC vCISO bundle or something like that. It's meant to help speed you up. I always have to say that, and Ozzie back me up here. It's meant to speed you up. It's meant to aid you, but you are the human. You are the authority. You need to review and apply, but it's meant to help make your life a lot easier, and it has made a lot of lives a lot easier in this industry. And then the last AI capability that we want to just touch on is one of the newer ones. Obviously, again, Evan and Alfie have been in the app for some time, but have just continuously improving. But the new one is ODP detection. Now, we'll get into ODP, ODV functionality here in a moment. But just know when we get and articulate what ODPs and ODVs and this functionality in IntelliGRC is, just know that one of the fundamental capabilities is creating values. Like that does take time to go and create the values that will map to the ODPs. And I'll give some clarity here in a moment on what that means. We have a capability now in the app just to kind of show the progress of our AI, intentions to detect what some of those values ought to be based on information that it receives, similar to how Alfie works and can make decisions based on evidence that it receives, or how Evan, based on parsing and stuff like that, can make suggestions on mappings based on evidence it receives. So it's interacting with your information to make your life easier for some of these other important facets that need to get done: mapping, writing implementation statements and assessing gaps, and creating values for your ODPs, which are going to be a fundamental thing under 800.171 Rev 3 and 853. And we use it in other frameworks as well. But that's just a quick update on our AI priorities, right? But now to get into kind of some of the specifics. So, Ozzie, do you want to talk about Document Hub and the ODV functionality, and we can have some back and forth on this?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so I'll touch on the Document Hub first. So Document Hub has been a long-awaited feature, and it's constantly going through improvements. Right now, it's actually getting a pretty decent-sized overhaul with a lot of the feedback we've been collecting this year. The way it works is essentially we are using Document Hub as anything that a company wants to use as policies, documented policies, procedures, plans, whatever documentation they're creating as part of their compliance program, right? The fact that we also offer through the platform templated documents, and a MSP, for example, a service provider, can take those templates and customize it to their liking on how they provide their services to their customers and do a mass distribution to all their customer tenants, right? The cool thing about the approach here is that it has some of the built-in functionality that you're looking for in terms of like governance strategies or governance methodologies of like having an owner assigned to that artifact, an approvals workflow, and an in-app signature capability, review cycles with revision histories, right? Exportable copies of the history, as well as exporting the documents themselves, customizing the look and feel of the documents through style sheets. Those are all the functionality we've been building into it. And we're adding more and more. The cool thing about its integration with ODP and ODVs, and before I kind of dive into that, let's kind of take a step back and say, what is ODP again? So organization-defined parameter, an example could be password complexity is the parameter. It's a pretty common requirement across most cyber compliance standards and frameworks out there, right? You're always going to see that password complexity requirement. That is a parameter. Whereas the values could be 8-character passwords, must be 1 uppercase, 1 lowercase. Those are distinct values. So the idea is that what we did is we took in Intelli a different stance in that we don't just use ODP and ODV vanilla from NIST 853 or even 171 Rev 3. We actually took that methodology that we're fans of and applied it to all frameworks, because in SOC 2, you can also say the password complexity is what? X, right? Blank. Insert value here, right? It's a useful thing. And the idea behind our approach to it is that once you have these values defined, um, you can inject them into your documentation. You can inject them, we call them insertion tags, into the organization's SSP, in the gap analysis statements, and in the document hub documents. The idea being that each tenant has a defined value, that once a document is published into that tenant, it consumes that value and it starts tailoring that document for you. So this way you have one place you can make an update, and it makes mass updates across the board, right? Variables is another thing we added to the tool that is above and beyond just the traditional ODP, ODVs, where an ODP is usually tied to a framework and its set of requirements, right? Like password complexity. Variables is whatever you want it to be. This is where we gave the same kind of functionality to the customers and said, you define any custom variable you want, like bracket company name bracket. You can have a variable that says CISO that gets replaced with the person's name, whatever it is you want to create as a variable. So as people customize any documents throughout our platform, they can create a library of these variables that essentially will just automatically dynamically update based on the data that you've defined in those variables. So that's where then again, it kind of leads into Document Hub and how it kind of works together.
Yeah, it is and this is obviously maybe hyperbolic in some ways, but it's a revolutionary feature. It's one of those things that is on par, in my opinion, for people who especially companies that have never really formally done documentation well, but want to get serious about it. It is one of those things like I would love to be in the shoes of somebody that has to do that for the first time and then has a tool like this to do it, instead of how my history has been, where we've had to, you know what it's like, have to write all these documents and policies manually, or even from templates, but have to work through them and oh man, 2 weeks before the assessment, we realized that this one tool can't, implement that particular value. It has a minimum that doesn't align with that or something like that. And so we had to go back and update our implementation statements and find if it's referenced in any more than one policy. Because sometimes, like, for example, the acceptable use policy pulls, or at least our methodologies, we pull that from other policies to make sure that anything that's relevant to, standard users, everyday users, is getting communicated to them without then having to go read the 12 other policies that you have. But that's an example where you might have multiple of the same value, but in multiple different policies and documents, and in your SSP, that it's like, man, I would love to just change that in one place and it make my life easier. So that is the heart behind not just the fact that we need to do ODBs and ODPs because it's a required thing to define in your 800.171, Rep 3 or 853 or other framework implementation, but it's like, wait, let's actually make that a usable feature that makes people's lives easier. And that's the goal. And I will say, we know it's a relatively new feature, coming out within the last, handful of months. But I think from Ozzie's heart and my heart, we encourage you to start playing with it now, even if you don't want to use it right away. Say you're mid prepping for an assessment and you don't want to change your SSP. That's fine. You don't have to. But what you can do is you can start doing some of that. And we did a webinar on this, so feel free to go look at the recording of that if you weren't able to attend. It's on our YouTube channel. But if you can go start detecting values and creating some and adopting some from our suggestions, or what say the DoD requires of Rep 3, whatever the case may be. You can start building out that footprint of ODBs and ODVs for the ODPs in IntelliGRC like today, so that it's ready when you are ready to take that next step. You don't have to, go through that process. And we do encourage you guys, start building out your variables, start building out your ODVs, and just have fun with it, because it is meant to really make people's lives easier, and it's available for use now. So you don't have to, mess up any documentation or change anything in your SSP, if you're not ready for that, but it is available for you to start laying the groundwork. So, kind of just to touch on some other high level things that have been going on. Those have been some of the bigger ones, obviously. But some kind of bigger takeaways when it comes to integrations and other ICL milestones and stuff like that. one of the big ones, and I think, I'll get your thoughts on this, Ozzie. One of the bigger ones that we've done is we have this first iteration of vulnerability management integration with IntelliGRC with Microsoft Defender for Endpoint, which is one of the most common, for cloud-centric, cloud-only companies that have like Microsoft 365 E5 or G5 licenses, is that Microsoft Defender for Endpoint capability is doing a lot of the heavy lifting when it comes to vulnerability management. So we have an integration with that now that will be able to pull in vulnerabilities, create, I believe, some POAMs, and help you live out vulnerability management within IntelliGRC, and not you have to do it manually because you're looking at the XDR platform and then going over to Intelli and creating have some better functionality here now for you guys to use it kind of seamlessly. When it comes to Intune, we've got an integration with Intune now. It's pulling in policies from your configuration profiles. You're able to map that to requirements. Another thing that with the way that we've been doing integrations, especially here recently, is the evidence that we create as a direct result of the integration and the data that it pulls in is going to essentially keep ongoing, continuous, relevant evidence available to the viewer. Whether it's, when it's time for assessment and you got to click prepare evidence for submission in the output section, and you got to deliver something, or say you got people internally that are doing self-assessments or whatever the case may be. If you have the integration set up in the proper way, you can have reports configured to constantly have the most recent report mapped to the requirements that you so choose, and so that you'll never have to go pull a fresh copy of those reports. It just automatically has it by virtue of the API integration being configured. So that's a big thing for a lot of us, and that goes for Intune and for Defender for Endpoint. These reports are available, they're ready to go. You keep it up to date, and you can choose whether or not you want to keep long histories of a report or just only have the most recent copy. Doesn't matter. It's there for you guys, and that's our heart behind all of our integrations that are producing information for validation purposes. That's how we're doing all of them from now on, just so that there's always a steady stream of accurate, current information available for assessors and implementers alike in IntelliGRC. Ozzie, you have anything to add to those two?
No, I mean, I think the overall theme of the integrations is for Intelli is, we've been kind of consistent on its purposes. It's either going to seed assets for scoping purposes into the platform, assets being people and devices and things like that, right? The second thing is we are going to look at something that might relate to evidence, right? So these reports we're talking about. And then the third is potentially a benchmark rule, right? Where benchmark rules are pretty binary. It's like if you have this setting in place, equals pass, or if it's not, then equals fail, right? Those are the three common use cases that we've been leveraging. So the cool thing is that all this data that comes into these integrations, whether it be, and we also launched Huntress's integrations this summer, know before. But the cool thing is that all of that feeds into context for Alfie, right? And I think it's very powerful. It's not just simply a static database mapping on the back end that is somebody's opinion, maybe it's Steven's opinion. It says this particular result should be related to these controls. It's actually more dynamic than that, right? It's using our AI functionality to make sense of it, right? And say, I think this is related to these controls, and Alfie thinks that there's some issues here or some benefits here that could be evidence, right? And I think that's the way we're going about it, because it just makes the most sense that we can't statically have mappings always there and expect it to work consistently every time, where like some customer I might say, well, that one Huntress output or that one Huntress integration data point should also satisfy these controls, in my opinion, right? Let's not worry about that. You could certainly do that, but let's use the AI to tell us where we think it's going to go. And so the more data you get into the platform, the stronger outcomes, right? It's just more and more context.
Yeah, and mixed in with a bunch of optimizations and improvements. Just also be aware that alongside with 800.171 Rep 3 being added to the app as an evaluation that you can work on now ahead. But if you're in the DIB, start working on that ahead of schedule, or if you're preparing for the FAR CUI rule, thinking about that, or if you're the a Canadian company trying to align with 800.171.3. It's there. But alongside that, we also introduced, again, a couple days before the suspension was announced, we also introduced CMMC Level 3, which is going to be based on that 800.172 set of requirements that are enhancements to the 800.171 requirements. So just a lot going on. We're busy people over here, and we've got a pretty big roadmap that we're trying to make a reality. So really quickly, just know that we are not, if we're trying to summarize all the things that we're trying to communicate today, we're not encouraging people to walk away from the suspension, especially with any kind of apathy. We don't want people to be apathetic to this and say, okay, now I can let my guard down. So that's a big thing for us. Just also know there's an RFI out there. Please provide information. If you're knowledgeable about this program, you have strong opinions about and maybe even anecdotal situations that you think are super relevant, submit an RFI, and submit it in the format that they kind of, they're going to prefer. You can see a lot of people posting on like LinkedIn, for example, examples of their RFIs that they posted. Check them out and see if anything that you have could really contribute to this, because I like Ozzie said, I think we're hopeful that the outcome of this is going to be better in the long run because of information received through programs and requests for information like this one. So we're big on that. Take a look at the blog I mentioned, the CR26 one. I think that'll be helpful. We also have other blogs coming out all the time. I'm trying to be very consistent with that, and our marketing team, Charles and the team, are really staying on top of it. And sometimes we get busy, and we're maybe not able to be as consistent, but we really should try to get a blog written every week or so, just to help different obvious areas of this industry. Just try to provide good context and help as they build out, queries of AI to do research and stuff. Hopefully our blogs will contribute to the data sets that they review and, provide helpful context for results that maybe everybody is using. So just keep that in mind. And then we really wanted to this was one of the big points as a call to action especially for our customers, but also prospects, people who are considering, what GRC tool they should go with, especially for MSPs. This is a big thing for us. We want you to know that we prioritize heavily our roadmap and our approach to things based on feedback. We are a feedback-centric company. And so if you guys have things that you like to see, things that you don't like as much, or constructive criticism, whatever the case may be, I know that many of you don't shy away from this, but maybe if you do, don't shy away from giving us feedback. We want it desperately. We need it. It's going to make us better. It's going to make us the most efficient tool out there. I think we already are there and on that path and staying on that path. And I think only with your help can we stay the course, making the best GRC tool possible that will help the most people and organizations possible. So any closing thoughts from you, Ozzie?
No, I mean, I think everything was well said. Just to iterate on the MSP's feedback, right? We want feedback from everyone. Like we said, don't shy away from it. But even if you have questions, our team is pretty much an open book. We always operate in the way where we want to add value first, and then if it makes sense for you, then you can become a customer. Right. And so I say that because you can comment on this video if it's on YouTube, ask questions about CMMC, SOC 2, ISO. I think what's really important here is that IntelliGRC is not the typical GRC tool vendor out there. We're more than that. We're your partner, right? Our number one focus is your success. And so you can call us. We always tell our customers, even our non-customers, call us anytime. You want to know how we do scoping? You want to learn about our methodologies that works across multiple frameworks? You want to learn how to scale compliance as a service? Whatever it may be, right? Call us. This is what we obsess over. We're a bunch of compliance nerds with an engineering background. So, we could try to translate both sides of the house. So, yeah, I mean, contact us. Like, I think that's the biggest value add in partnerships with us, is that we're not going to simply be, here's a tool, have a nice day. No, we're here to teach, we're here to enable, we're here to educate, and we're here to be your like support system.
Absolutely. So you can follow up with us. You can go to our website, IntelliGRC.com. You can follow me, Steven Molter on LinkedIn, Ozzie, Saeed on LinkedIn, any of our team on LinkedIn. We are really receptive people. We want you to reach out to us, like Ozzie said. And for more information on some of the more other features that we didn't get to go over today, check out our release notes. We try to keep those kind of accurate and up to date and all the time available to everybody. You can check it out in your support portal, as well as we send it out, I believe, in email as well. So, keep an eye out for those. And shout out to Matt Travis with the Cyber AB. He and I had a great conversation. So be on the lookout for some upcoming great podcast episodes that we're really looking forward to sharing with you guys. So I guess until next year, I hope you guys have a great year, and I hope you guys have fun using IntelliGRC and that it helps you greatly. We'll see you in the next one.